Hi, I'm Jeremy, and this is the Bona Tera Seedling Division demonstration. We're going to be dividing some of these seedlings that we typically give out at our giveaway events. People come and they can get 10, 25, or 50 seedlings in a little cell, and I'm going to walk you through how to separate them without damaging them, pot them up, and get them into the ground. First thing you'll want to consider is your workspace. You're going to want to work in a shady and cool place to keep the plants from getting hot or drying out. Then you're also going to want to have your tools set up and ready to go. So the tools are pretty simple for this. You're going to need pots to put your seedlings in with a little bit of potting soil. You're going to need a bucket of water for washing the roots. I've got a tray here so I can sort my seedlings, and a simple workbench and a comfortable seat. So the ones we've chosen today are Rudbeckia triloba. The reason I chose these is because they have fibrous roots, and those are going to be some of the more difficult ones to divide because the roots are thin, they're easy to break, and there's a lot of them. They're kind of tangled up. So now that we've got our table set up and we're all ready to go, first thing I'm going to want to do is carve out what I think I can pot up in about 15 minutes. The reason we want to do it in 15-minute chunks is because we don't want the roots to dry out in the process. So first thing we're going to do is knock some of the soil off of the seedlings. I'm just sort of shake and tap it to get as much of this soil off as I can before we actually get to the dividing and washing the roots. So that's about all that could come off easily. And my next step is going to be to wash the rest of the soil off in my water. So I like to palm the foliage of the plants so that I have a nice good grip on the crown. That's going to be the most sensitive part of the plant, and so I'm going to support that so that doesn't get damaged, and it's also just going to kind of keep everything neat and clustered together. So we'll stick the roots into the water and kind of shake all the soil off that we can. So that's just going to be a little bit of shaking, and now you can see there's still a little bit on there, so I'm going to get that off. So now we've got our washed and cleaned seedlings. It's going to be time to start separating them. So I'm pulling these out, and as we're doing this, we want to make sure that we're keeping the roots from drying out. So a couple things are going on here by keeping them from drying out, and that can be explained by the two functions of water that the plant has. So it's going to use water to photosynthesize, and it's also going to use water to cool itself down. So during the division process, we've definitely taken a few of these roots and broken them, so it's now out of balance. It no longer can pull enough water to support these leaves. And we are going to bring them back into balance by bringing them in the shade. When they go into the shade, we're going to be both reducing the amount of sunlight that hits the leaves to reduce the photosynthesis it's able to do, and then we're also going to be reducing the temperature, so it needs to use less water to cool itself down. And then we also need to keep the roots moist because the way the vascular system in the plant works is that as water evaporates from the leaves, it draws water up through the roots, through its system. Not dissimilar from like how a siphon works. So if you get an air bubble in that line, then the plant is likely to end up having to cut that root off and die, and it'll have to grow new ones. So that's why we tend to work in 15-minute chunks, and it's why I like to have a tray or a plate to sort them on, because once they get wet, they can kind of sit in a thin film of water on that tray. So now we're going to start sorting, and you're going to come up with some that have, not that many roots, and some that have plenty of roots. So I like to sort mine into two different piles, ones that have more damaged roots or less roots. I'll plant those with other small ones. So these two will be planted together in the same hole, whereas one with more roots, that's about the same length as the leaves, there's multiples of them, that should be fine and should be able to survive just fine on its own and easily be divided later. So that's another big one. These are all nice and big ones. Nope, there's a little small one. Big, nice distribution. So now that I've got these sorted, it's time to put them into containers. So a lot of people think that plants have to be grown out in a container for them to have the best possible health, but that's not really the point of these containers. These containers are to make the plants portable. So if you are selling plants, that's really important that you be able to move your plants around to market. But if you are planting these seedlings at your own home, you might be better off putting them in the ground. So if you treat your ground like potting soil, there's actually significantly more room for them to grow out into. So the reason you might want to use a container in your home garden, though, is if you're trying to do these seedlings during the heat of summer and you need to move them into the shade to heal in for a couple weeks before they can start growing, that is a good idea. It's also a bit easier for an entry-level person who's just like learning to divide the seedlings to put it in a container. It'll be easier to monitor your progress. It will be easier to tell if there's weeds, since you can, if you put it in the ground and you're putting little seedlings in the ground, it may be difficult to tell the difference between a seedling or a weed. So a good place to start is with a container, but ultimately your goal is to get these in the ground as soon as possible. So now that it's time to put these into their containers, if you're interested in saving some soil or you have limited numbers of containers, you can easily put 3 or 4 in each container, and when it's time to plant them, it'll be a lot easier to divide them, because instead of having 50 or 100 little seedlings in a container, you just have 4 or 5 or 6. So it's pretty easy to divide without damaging them. So a container like this, I might put between 3 and 5 seedlings in and grow them out and divide them at planting time. So when it comes time to plant, you're going to want to look at the seedling and determine exactly where the crown is. So the crown is where the stem and leaves meet the roots. You can tell if it needs to be underground because it won't have any photosynthetic cells. So these roots are white, no photosynthetic cells, whereas once it gets to the point where it should be above ground, we have red, we have green, we have different tones and colors. You can tell that's where the soil line should be, is right where the roots end. So I'm going to grab these by the bottom third of the seedling with these planting tweezers. I like to use these planting tweezers because they allow me to easily stick the roots all the way deep down in the soil without having to dig a hole, get my fingers dirty, and it's really just a lot faster. So I'll grab them by the bottom third and just kind of push them down in there until the soil level is right at the crown. And I'll put 3 or 4 of these in. So as I'm going, it's going to be a good idea to water them within 10 or 15 minutes of actually getting them divided. A lot of times with your fresh potting soil, it can actually be polarizing to the water, making it run off and away from it. So usually I'll pot up like 5 or 6 of these. I'll set them aside into the shade and I'll mist them And then every time I finish a round of them, I'll mist all of them. That way I can get multiple gentle waterings and give the soil plenty of time to absorb the water. And then once these are all potted up, we'll put these in the shade to heal in. Once again, they're grown in the shade to reduce the sunlight and to reduce the temperature, bringing them more in balance. So a way you can determine whether they are ready to go back out into the sun to finish growing in. One metric I like to use is I'll bring the plants out of the shade after, say, a week, or if they're looking really healthy and looking like they're growing well, and it seems like it's time, I'll take them out of the shade and I'll put them in the sun. Frequently, they will wilt that day, the first day they get back out in the sun, but what you're actually waiting for is to see what happens after the first night. So they may get wilty during the day, but if they're able to spring their leaves back up and get rehydrated overnight, then you know they've repaired their roots enough to be able to be out in the sun. If they get all wilty the first day they're out in the sun, and then you come out the next morning and they still haven't regained the spring in their leaf and they're kind of still sitting flat, then you know it's still time for more of them for them to stay in the shade longer. And then for how long they should be in the container, really it's going to depend on the plant. It's going to depend on how big of the container is. It's going to depend on how much fertilizer is in the soil. That'll determine how quickly they can grow. So it's hard to give a specific amount of time or in days until they're ready, but roughly it can be anywhere between 10 and 25 days until they're ready to come out of these containers. They're all healed up and they're ready to be divided and put in the ground. And that's the ultimate goal, is to get them in the ground as soon as possible. You don't want them to grow into their containers so tightly that they're drying out every day. If you're doing that, if they're drying out within 24 hours, then that means you're going to have to be watering them every 24 hours when they go in the ground. So, and also if they're that grown into the container, they're going to be difficult to separate out from these containers if you put multiple seedlings in them and you want to divide them at planting time. So really, I mean, the moment that they're ready to be out in the sun is the best time to get them planted. And once again, that can be anywhere from a couple weeks to maybe up to 5 or 6 weeks until they've been totally healed in and they're ready to go into the ground.